Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 4 of the Two Oceans Half Marathon podcast. Really excited to be here with you guys as always. I have Dev with me. Dev, how are things going?
Yeah, well, thanks, Shona. Excited to be here and excited for this sort of phase that we're going to be talking about today. It's one that always comes at the right time.
Definitely, and part of that is I mean, I'm just so excited, Dev. I was so tired through January, as people are calling it. It was possibly the longest January, 3 months of January that I've ever experienced in my life. And so really glad that we're finally in Feb. And really, this topic that we're going to talk about today is coming at a good time because I was so tired of January. People are probably feeling a little bit tired after having completed their first sort of set or block of training. And so we're talking about recovery today, which is going to be really, really cool. And you might be feeling a bit tired being in the 4th week of your plan. And so this, as Dev says, this week is coming at exactly the right time. So Dev, just before we start, okay, because I think everyone always gets us confused. But why is recovery so important?
Yeah, Sean, this is I won't say a confusing topic, but it is something that's very often neglected. We also, let's maybe just differentiate first. There's a difference between rest and recovery. Both still kind of aiming to achieve the same thing. And by achieve the same thing, I'm talking about aiming to achieve our training adaptation. But rest is rest. It's exactly what it says. It means take the day off, take time off, do nothing. Recovery, we're generally talking about lowering our training load. So the amount of volume we're doing, maybe a bit of intensity we're doing, how many days we might be running in the week. We're talking about just cutting down on our volume of training. And really important, it's making sure that we are able to just build back up for what is still to come. So I talk about the importance or why that recovery becomes really critical. If you think about every training session, remember, a training session is not where we improve or get gains from training or build anything up. Our training session, we actually have a systemic breakdown. Every time we go out for a run or a strength session, our body or our muscles have got little micro tears that's happening. There's damage being done to the body in the training session. It is only really when we recover that our body goes, sure, I really didn't like what you just did to me, either in the training session now or for the last 3 weeks. And I'm going to build myself just a little bit stronger so that the next time you put me through that stress or that horrible load, I'm ready to handle it. And that's what your body's doing in the recovery stages. So whether it is a rest day or a recovery day or a recovery week, we really are getting the adaptation, the physiological adaptation from the 3 weeks that we've just finished. So I talk about where these generally come at the right time. We've been building, hopefully gradually building, but we are starting to feel that effect of 3 weeks of consistent training, hard training. And now that recovery week is just for us to go, okay, take a deep breath, let's recover, let's make sure that we are building ourselves a little bit stronger. So when we get back into the next block of training or the next 4-week cycle, we're at a slightly higher level. We can continue this sort of upward trajectory in our conditioning, and we're a little bit more ready or resilient to be able to handle the next load of training that's going to be thrown at us.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that, Dev, because it's so important, because people think, and you've said it, but I just want to say it again, is people think that you're only getting fitter and stronger when you're doing the exercise. And I think when you start to realize that you actually only get that benefit when you're recovering, you really start to understand why we carry on about this so much. And so, guys, I'm going to give you, or Dev is going to give you a whole load of what the best forms of recovery are later in this podcast. But for now, Dev, in this recovery week and in our next recovery week, what are we focusing on?
Yeah, so I spoke about cutting down our training volume. So that's the biggest area here, regardless of what training plan you're on, regardless of what level runner you're on. We're going to cut down the volume relative to where you are and relative to your plan, obviously. So in some instances, that might mean if you were on a 4-day-a-week run, for example, we're cutting you down to 3 runs in the week. If you were on a 5-day a week, we're cutting you down to 4 runs. Some cases it'll still be 4 runs, but those runs are now a little bit shorter. So it's overall volume. So instead of maybe running for 8 hours in the week, now you're running for 5 hours in the week. I talk about the interval sessions as well. They might be slightly shorter. Remember, we don't always take intervals or intensity out of the training plan. Your body's so used to the stimulus of having that in, and we still want you to be able to have that stimulus and still be able to fire when we need it. So we'll keep some intensity in the plan, but again, we might cut down 2-minute hill repeats, for example, into a 1 minute or a 60 seconds is 1 minute, but cut down to sort of a minute and only 4 or 5 of those reps with maybe a little bit longer rest in between. So cutting down overall volume so that we're not also just trying to cram training in. Another key one is our strength. We're massive advocates for the strength training. We're looking there at cutting down our strength sessions in the week as well. So we're trying to focus on as much as possible to try and freshen you up so that you are still training, you're still getting an adaptation, but we are then obviously kicking it on so we're ready to take on the next training cycle. So we talk about these sort of macro and micro cycles in terms of 3-week cycles, and in each, or 4-week cycles with a 3-week build, 1-week recovery, and in each of those, what different phases are we on? So strength training or strength focused, maybe some speed endurance type of focused, but it's that recovery week that breaks those cycles up. And again, I'm coming back to that, we're building up ready to take on the next training session. Another thing we generally like to do in our recovery week is, because we are freshening up towards the end of that recovery week, to actually throw in a time trial. Now, not all our plans will have time trials in. So time trials are all out type of effort. Very often we prescribe either a 4 or 5K time trial. But this is generally where we're now going to be kind of testing where we are. And has the last phase of our training cycle worked? Do we need to make adjustments to our training paces? So that's kind of what we use the time trials for. And they fit so well into a recovery week because we hopefully are freshening up. It's also a good opportunity for us to test our race week. So are we cutting down enough? Are we freshening up well enough? Is our warm-up before that time trial well enough? These are all the kind of things that you would ultimately be doing in race week, so that we do know, okay, I can perform on the day when I do need to perform. So that's the use of a time trial. That's why we like to throw them in. Some people might ask, okay, well, there's a local race. Can I do the local race in place of a time trial? I don't generally have a problem with that. It is going to be dependent on the distance though. So I would try and keep it to a 5K, maybe a park run. If you've got access to a park run nearby you, that works pretty well as a race, as a time trial, because you've got other people pushing you. So there's a slight sort of an extra motivator to it. Maybe a 10K, again, depending on the level of runner you're at. I generally, if you're a back of the pack type of runner, or this is your first 21 that you're building to, I'm generally going to stay away from going to do a 10K race as a time trial effort. You'd be better off and would get better results from a 5K, and then also recover quick enough so that next week we can get really back into the meat of the training again.
Yeah, excellent. David, I just sort of focus on those time trials because I know that a lot of the running clubs host a time trial every week. And that's, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing that the clubs are providing for their runners, but we're not suggesting that we do these time trials weekly, right? You're suggesting that we keep these within our recovery weeks, right? We're not racing a 5K time trial every week.
Yeah, so that's exactly. So we really are focusing on, we've got a bigger goal at hand here. Our half marathon in April is what we're working towards here. So we don't need to be testing ourselves in every training session, and we don't need to be testing where we're at and see if we're getting fitter and fitter and fitter every single week. We need to trust the process. The time trials, as I said, are there to really help tweak the further prescription or the further training. I don't mind if you go and run with your club every week. So if it's a Tuesday time trial or a Thursday time trial, again, we're runners, we social people, you want to be there. I've got no problem with you doing that, but I'd recommend doing that as an easy run. So if you've got an hour's run and that's a 5K time trial and that's only going to take you 25 minutes, tack on a couple of extra Ks before or afterwards. So you're still getting your hours training run, but you've been down to the club, you've had a chance to run with a couple of people. So I would kind of use that as an easy training run, but stick to those recovery weeks when the time trials are really focused there, where we can push ourselves and we can say, all right, I'm fresh enough to push myself. I'm at lower risk of getting injured. And I know that, okay, this is what I need to make adjustments to going into the next block of training.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Let's get into the nitty-gritties of it now. So what are the best forms of recovery? I mean, we can talk, compression garments, and I mean, there's lots of fancy, expensive stuff out there. What are the best forms of recovery?
Yeah, so I like to kind of build this around, talk about 3 pillars. Okay, so we've really gone into the first pillar, and the first pillar there being reducing your training load. So load management is going to be our first pillar when we're thinking about recovery and the best form of recovery. Second, and none of these are more important than the other. These 3 pillars are really critical. But second here is the nutrition aspect to it, okay? And to a large degree, what we're doing to fuel ourselves before and during those training sessions are really important, because that's our jet fuel, that's the fuel, that's what's getting us through those training sessions, obviously depending on durations and intensities. But more importantly, when we're talking from a recovery point of view, we're talking about what you are doing post-training sessions, so post-run, post-strength session. Now, this is important that it is happening after every training session. A common question we get is, I've only got an hour run. Do I really need to eat during that hour run? If you're not eating in that hour run, it's really important to make sure that you're eating immediately after that run. We've kind of got this kind of golden window, if you'd like. I won't say golden hour because it's not an hour. It's a sort of a 20 to 40 minute window that we like to work with, where it's really critical for you to be putting something back in your body after a training session. Very importantly, after long runs and higher intensity training sessions. When I talk about nutrition and what to be putting back, we need to be thinking twofold here. We need to be thinking carbohydrates and protein. When we talk recovery, very often people think, I need protein. I need the protein shake and I need to just be getting in protein. If you go and look at what your average protein shake consists of, there's a high concentration of carbohydrates in that. So the carbohydrates, we generally work on a 4-to-1 ratio. So 4 parts carbohydrates to 1 part protein. Now, the carbohydrates, we think jet fuel, but now you've burned through that fuel in a training session. So the muscle glycogen stores have depleted. The carbohydrates immediately after allows you to replenish that muscle glycogen stores. And in that window of that 20 to 40 minutes straight after the session is when the absorption of the carbohydrates and topping up those stores is most effective. The protein aspect to it is what's helping us repair our muscle fibers that have been damaged. I talk about the damage that's happening in a training session. That's where the protein comes in to help us rebuild and repair those broken down muscles. So carbs and proteins are absolutely critical. Think about the balance of what you're getting in. And I know you're a massive fan of this, and it kind of always puts a little twinkle in your eye when someone says you can have a Steri Stumpy or a chocolate milk after your training session. Really, really good recovery nutrition. You do more often than not actually have to be taking in more than you think. So that falls right up your alley even more, Sean, because now you can have more Steri Stumpy than what you need to have. But chocolate milk has really come out. There's a lot of literature to say a chocolate milk is a very good recovery drink because you are getting a high carbohydrate and protein mix in that drink itself. Yeah. So it's always a really good one for you to take in quick and immediately afterwards, but then thinking about the rest of the day as well, where you are still taking in protein and proper meals and proper food as well throughout the day.
Okay. Yeah. I must say it, and I think I've said it before, but it was honestly one of my favorite days as a sports scientist, reading article after article about the how effective chocolate milk is at this replenishment. And it's a great excuse to get a Steri Stumpy. And also, in all honesty, it's a lot cheaper than a protein shake, right? And so, you're doing a long run every weekend, these things start to add up. So it's a great way to get that really good form of nutrition in. Dev, you spoke about 3 pillars. You've mentioned 2. So you've mentioned load management, you've mentioned nutrition. What is the third one?
This one's a superpower. If you can get it right, it's sleep. And I know we all wish we could get a little bit more sleep. But sleep is, I've seen it time and time again, that if you can get just the sleep aspect of your training, and I'm going to call it part of training because it needs to be seen as part of your training cycle. But if you can get just the sleep right, it makes a massive difference to your performance. And you would have felt it if you've had a late night on a Friday night before a long run, or you worked late, you didn't sleep very well, you tossed and turned a little bit. It always affects the quality of that next training session. When we sleep, okay, the biggest thing here is our body goes into this, it's where we release our growth hormones and our testosterone. And that's what's helping us with that adaptation and rebuilding and regeneration. So optimally, to get that release of growth hormone and testosterone, you really want to be trying to get to bed before 10 o'clock. Now, I know that isn't always possible for most of us. I think it probably is a little bit more possible than we think, because we might lie on our phones till late at night. But you want to try and get into bed before 10 o'clock. Science has kind of shown that that's really the optimal range or the optimal time to be in bed for the most effective release of growth hormone and testosterone for that regeneration. We're always trying to balance this quantity and quality of sleep. Now, quantity does take a knock very often, and we do struggle to get the amount. I'd love to be able to tell you need to be getting in 8 hours of sleep. And the science shows you need to be getting in 8 hours of sleep. But realistically, most of us don't actually, not only don't have the option, but we just never really get that right. So trying to find that balance of quantity, but really working on the quality of sleep. And I think the quality of sleep is something that you have a little bit more control over more often than not. We talk about quality of sleep. We talk about sleep hygiene. So I talk about being on our screens, so screen time, so phones, iPads, watching movies, whatever it might be. We want to try and get away from that blue light. We want to stay away from screen time about an hour, at best 45 minutes before we go to bed. So that's really important. Our body and our minds, it just keeps triggering things in our minds that we don't actually switch off properly. So if you're on your phone just before you go to sleep, you put your phone down, you try and close your eyes, it generally is going to take you a little bit longer to fall asleep because your mind's still active and still going, and probably a little bit frightened with half the stuff you've read on the news lately. So you want to try and stay away from screen times about an hour before sleep. Then ideal, you want to also try and control the environment that you're sleeping in. So a dark environment, blackout curtains work really, really well. If you've got something plugged in, I actually bought a little mosquito repellent thing, plugged it into my wall the other night, and it's got this massive orange light that shines through the night. You want to try and cover those lights up. Standby lights on a TV, chargers, those sort of things. Your eyelids are very thin membranes, and you might not realize it, but if you close your eyes, there's still a level of light that's coming through your eyelids. So you want to try and have that room as dark as you possibly can. Another one to that, or the environment, is the temperature of the room that you're sleeping in. If you've got a nice cool environment, so I'm not saying put the aircon on and turn it into a fridge, because you're definitely not going to sleep very well then. But at the same time, you don't want to be in this hot environment. You need a nice, cool, optimal environment that also does allow for good quality of sleep. So that's what I'm referring to when I talk about sleep hygiene. At the end of the day, though, for me, we talk about these 3 pillars. These are the non-negotiables. If you can get your sleep right, if you can get your load management right, and you can get your nutrition right, you're laughing all the way, and your training is definitely, you're going to see this massive improvement in your training, and you actually haven't trained any harder. So that's the biggest thing here. We're not cramming load, we're not cramming volume. We've just got load management right, nutrition right, and sleep right. and all of a sudden you're a much better runner for it. So those for me are the non-negotiables.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know. Don't mock me, because I know you like to mock me about being old. But if you don't have dark blackout curtains, I've actually bought an eye mask. And not the ones that I do feel quite old when I put them on. I feel like an old lady putting them on, but not those ones that you get on the plane that squash your eyes. You can actually, I've bought a couple online now that are really nice, and they're soft. They've got a little like cushioning around your eye. They are so super comfortable that I'm getting to the point now where I don't actually, I struggle to sleep without them now. Like any light is coming in. So yeah, absolutely love those. And then Dave, so those are the non-negotiables, those 3 pillars. Excuse me. But what are why are the other things such a big dollar business? Things like compression socks, things like the big compression, they look like jets, that you put your legs in, where do those fit into recovery now?
If you're over 50 and want to recover from sessions faster, run pain and injury free, and improve your endurance, then be sure to join Lindsay and I for our upcoming Faster Beyond 50 Masterclass. In it, we'll show you how we helped a 70-year-old run a 47-minute, 18-second 10K, and how you can take those exact same principles and apply them in your training. Simply scan the QR code that's on screen right now, or click on the link in the description below to save your seat in the training now. We look forward to seeing you there.
Yeah, so those, we kind of call those the nice to haves, the little cherry on the top. Now, there's definitely place for them, and there's literature that has been done that does show that they do help. Really important though, you need to find what works for you. So not everyone responds the same to different things. So compression garments, for example, if you find that they're uncomfortable, you're probably going to be better off not using them than what you are actually using a compression garment. We've also seen that there is scientific evidence to show compression garments do help with recovery, but you tend to find that guys run with them as well. And there's no real evidence to show that there's any benefit to your training or your performance by running in compression garments. So the thing still comes down to, if you're not getting the sleep right, the nutrition right, and your load management right, you can try compression garments, massage boots, massage guns, ice bars, those sort of things. Nothing is going to work if you're not getting the basics right. And those 3 pillars, those are really important. I talk about, and I mentioned ice baths here. Ice baths is a massive trend. I know you and I have spoken about it recently. All over social media, everyone's jumping into an ice bath or jumping into this ice cold ocean. A lot of the latest literature out at the moment is actually showing that ice baths or any cold water immersion really does not benefit you from a recovery point of view. It can actually hamper your adaptation. What I mean by that is, remember, I speak about this breakdown that's happening in the body and these little damages and micro tears and things. Your body's natural response to that is an inflammatory response. So it needs that. Your body needs that because that's how it's getting nutrients and blood and oxygen and everything to that area for us to start rebuilding and repairing. The minute you jump into an ice bath now, we're slowing down that inflammatory response. And as a result of that, that's hampering that adaptation and that repair cycle. There is place for it, and the place for it would probably be if you were doing a multi-day event, for example, or you're in a really big training block and you've done 3 runs in a row or 3 big sessions in a row. Not always advisable, but you've done 3 hard training sessions in a row. There, we generally can get away with an ice bath because it does actually slow down that inflammation, and it does allow us just to be able to get back to that next training session feeling a little bit fresher. However, it's definitely not something I would recommend you do every week, and definitely not after every training run, because we still want that natural inflammatory response to be happening for us to improve and adapt. Yeah, that's the right word, to adapt to what we've done and repair our bodies.
Yeah, excellent. I really wish that. You see, I was so happy about the chocolate milk studies, but I really, really wish these studies had come out when I was playing football, because, oh my gosh, I absolutely hate an ice bath. It's just something that, yeah, I've never enjoyed it, never worked for me. And like you say, a subjective feeling of those things actually outweighs, or in the literature anyways, that's what they're saying, is that it outweighs the benefits, and so I'm far more a foam rolling kind of girl. I have a really cool foam roller that I use. It's not ones where you get on the floor, whereas like I know Lindsay, as an example, he uses a weekly massage, and so yes, I think your point is spot on about finding what works for you. Dev, and then I guess this is really key, because now we know the what of what we need to make sure we are recovering enough, but how do we know that we are recovered enough and that we're ready for the next session or the next block?
Yeah, I love this question, because we're always telling you what to do, but how do I know when I'm ready to get going again? I'm going to kind of go very rudimentary and very basic before we start worrying about the gadgets and things that we do have out there. We here at Coach Perry like to use a very simple subjective measure, is how are you feeling? And it's something sort of as a coach that I feel is often very important, is to keep that human aspect and just ask the question, how are you feeling? And you can ask yourself, how am I feeling today? That's probably the best way. You know your body better than anyone, better than any device can, any algorithm can figure out. So if you wake up and I'm just feeling absolutely flat, let's take a step back and think about have we eaten well? Did we sleep well tonight? How hard was that training session? Did we train late last night? That might mean we need a little bit more time to recover. So that's the first one. How are you feeling? We like to use what we call here a stair test. We as runners are fit individuals. So for us to be walking up one or two flights of stairs really shouldn't be too much of an issue in our daily lives. If you find that you're walking up a flight of stairs and you get to the top and you're going, that I'm a little bit poked after that, I'm puffing here a little bit, that also is a really good indicator to go, hang on, the muscles in the legs just haven't recovered well enough yet. I need to just think about adapting my training. So that's important. Then we can look at things like resting heart rate. Resting heart rate has been around for a long time. Waking up, doing something simple as just measuring our pulse in the morning when we wake up. More ideal would be obviously to wear a chest strap, to put that on and measure what your resting heart rate is. And then an even more advanced step, and one that's probably better to actually use because it is also a little bit more instantaneous, is HRV, or heart rate variability. Now, the asterisk to both heart rate and HRV, or resting heart rate and HRV, is the accuracy of measure. So you need to be wearing a chest strap in order to measure HRV properly. You can't just rely on the little optical sensor on the back of your watch. So the accuracy in those measures are critical. And where heart rate variability comes in, so heart rate variability speaks to your parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems. Okay, so it's kind of your fight or flight system or mode in the body. And we are really looking for a high HRV score to tell you that you are ready to get into the next training session. So the HRV is that time or the duration between heartbeats. So if you see that little graph, an ECG heart graph, for example, the space or the timing between each of those beats is what we're talking about, the variability. So if you're getting a higher variability between those heartbeats, that kind of gives you a sign of readiness and you in a good state to rock and roll and get back to a hard training session or the next training session, regardless of what it might be. If you've got a low HRV score, it's a sign that, hang on, something is up. Your body's not quite happy. It's not in a good homeostasis. And we now need to start thinking, okay, well, again, what can go wrong? And HRV is very sensitive. So something like a glass of wine or one beer the night before will have an effect on your HRV score in the morning. And that's how sensitive our body is to things like that. So again, sleep, your nutrition, what you're taking in, all affects those scores. So you want to kind of keep a track over a couple of days and make sure that if your HRV is low, start thinking about maybe cutting back a little bit, change things up. If 2 or 3 days in a row is showing low HRVs, then we maybe need to say, okay, cool, let's reassess what our week's looking. Why are we getting sick? Is there something underlying? Readjust our week, and then from there, get back to training once those scores start to level out again.
Awesome. Can you touch on a little bit on the resting heart rate and how those scores work? So you've spoken around HRV and those scores, because we often get the question is, what is a good resting heart rate? So yeah, could you touch on that for us?
Yeah, sorry, good point. So resting heart rate, I talk about HRV being a little bit more instantaneous, and you can kind of work that on a 2 or 3 day cycle. Resting heart rate is something where we need to take that over a longer period of time. So it's a little bit less responsive, if you want to call it that, but it's something that you mentioned now. What is a good resting heart rate? That is very individual to you as a runner. You cannot compare your resting heart rate to the next person. So that's the first thing. I see it time and time again, people sitting in a coffee shop talking about, my heart rate got to this in my training session, or this is my resting heart rate, I'm way fitter than you. That's not what it means. What you're doing is you want to be tracking that value every day, and you want to kind of work it on the sliding scale. If you're seeing, let's say your specific resting heart rate is 50 beats, and that's where it sits, and every day it's 51, 49, 50, 51, somewhere around there, but it's keeping relatively steady, you're good, and that's how you'll monitor whether or not you're ready to get going. It's usually when you start seeing about 6 to 12 beat difference in your resting heart rate that you can go, okay, hang on, something's up. But again, that needs to happen over a couple of days, and it needs to be something, it can't just be today, because today might have just been, again, you had a late night last night and something's affected that. So if you're seeing that over 4, 5, 6 days, then you can go, okay, something's up. And same as what you would with the HRV, you're now going, okay, how do I adjust my training plan? Do I need to start considering maybe seeing a doctor, am I struggling with an underlying issue? So that's how you would use it to actually monitor. It needs to be done a little bit more over time, where the HRV, like I said, is a little bit more instantaneous.
Okay, that's amazing. And I think your point is so key there, is that the quality of the data that you're getting, or the way we can read into these metrics, is essentially only because of the quality of data that we're getting. I mean, you can see I wear my watch really loose, and because I just don't like it tight. And so my resting heart rate that the Garmin will measure throughout the day will tell me that it's 61, but I measure my own resting heart rate every morning when I wake up. And I sit in and around 48. So, I mean, that's a huge variance, and that is consistent, 48, 49, 47, in and around that all the time when I'm training well. And now it's telling me that my average resting heart rate is 61. So guys, really the quality of the data that you're putting into these measurements is absolutely important. And then Dev, last sort of question here, just you mentioned around, so now your HRV is tanking, or your resting heart rate's gone up a little bit over a couple of days. What do we do with that information? How do we adapt? How do we change our sessions or our training plan? What are the decisions that we make from that information?
Yeah, so I talk about not being a sissy, so you don't necessarily want to chicken out of everything, but that data is a good way for us to go, okay, my week, for example, tomorrow I'm supposed to do a hill repeat session or a high interval session. This is a good indicator to go, hang on, the body's not ready for that yet. Let's maybe turn that into a light run. Go out for even if it's a 20 or 30 minute test run, and just go out there just to test the legs, see how you're feeling. You're going to notice quite quickly. And the reason why I like to use a 20 to 30 minute run is it means you don't get too far away from home. You can turn around quite early in 20 minutes and go, sure, this is not going to work, and go walk back and go and grab a coffee. So something short, you'll know within that 20 minutes if today's the day for a training session or not. So that's how I would look at using it. Making realistic calls. You're not losing anything or going backwards in your training by changing that up and making it a 45 minute or a 20 or 30 minute easy run. And then seeing how the rest of the week, if you're in a big training block week, it might mean you need to cut back slightly because you might have actually pushed a little bit harder in a previous training block or on yesterday's training session, or you didn't get a good night's sleep. You need to think about how the rest of the week could also impact the overall training volume. You don't want to just keep hammering back and hammering as hard as you possibly can just because the plan says so, but your HRV and your body and everything else is saying, I need time out. Again, those are usually early warning signs that not just from a recovery point of view, but if it's an ongoing thing, I get it a lot with athletes where they go, oh, geez, I'm just not feeling well, or feeling it. I feel flat. My runs weren't good. And we check the HRV, and I'm like, hang on, something's coming up. And Stru's Bob, 2 or 3 days later, they've got a head cold or they're sick or something. So it is usually a good sign that something's up with the body. And if you're going to keep pushing through it, you risk making it even worse. Rather take a day or two off or cut back on your plan slightly, shake it off quicker, and you can get back to training.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent advice here, Dev. I mean, this whole podcast is full of so much value. So yeah, thank you so much for your time, as always, and your expertise here, because wow, I mean, just so much to go through. And really, for me, if you want to become a better runner, if you want to go and smash that goal at Two Oceans Half Marathon in April, this is really going to be one of the key aspects to helping you get there. More isn't always better, and really it's got a lot to do with your recovery. So, Dev, thank you for your time as always. And yeah, we'll see you again next week.
Cool. Thanks, guys. Take care.